guys, it's Dasha. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's video where I'm going to be talking about all the books I read in the month of July. This is, as you can probably tell already, a very long video. So what I'm going to do is do it a little bit differently. For every single book, right at the beginning, I'm going to quickly say what I liked and didn't like. I will also put timestamps down below so you can skip around. Typically, I don't put timestamps because I find for myself when people put timestamps, I only listen to the books that I already know. I get impatient and I skip around through the video. So I never did that for my videos, but this one is going to be so long that I think for everybody's sake, it's going to be easier. I'll have some timestamps down below where I start talking about every book. And like I said, at the beginning of each book, I will go over the synopsis and give a quick description of what I liked and didn't like, and then get into more full thoughts. I had a really good reading month for the most part, honestly, so there's gonna be a lot of things to discuss, a lot of hits and a few misses, but overall a lot of hits and really good stuff and just some really interesting chaotic reads. So let's get on into it. The first two books I'm going to talk about, I didn't actually give a rating for because I do not know how to even think about these books. The first book is Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Basterica. This is a horror novella about this alternate world where all animals have developed some kind of virus that makes them deadly to humans when eaten or in contact with them. So in order to combat this, so humans can continue to eat some kind of meat, humans have devised a system where they harvest and eat other humans, and it sounds really weird, and it really honestly was. What I liked about Tender is the Flesh, I liked how far it took the concept that it was going for, and I like how well everything was thought out. What I didn't like was how gross it was, and at some points it felt kind of unnecessary, and overall I did not like how overall pointless the story felt, given some of the themes and plot directions taken. This book was nasty, it was gross, it was shocking, and I'm guessing that's kind of the point, but I found it like just way too weird. I understood some of the messages and the themes, but at the same time, I didn't really kind of click with them. I couldn't tell if this was all just like vegan propaganda or if there was some kind of message about like consumption and ethical issues. But at the end of the day, it just didn't really click with me. Like, I can't even recommend this book in good conscience because it was so weird and disgusting. It just was really, really shocking. And again, that's probably what the book was going for, but it didn't necessarily work for me. But that doesn't mean I think it's bad. If you go into it, please be careful because it is a lot. And I've heard people describe it as such, but like literally when I finished it, I was sitting there like, what the fuck did I just read? And I think I'm definitely gonna have to sit on this one a little longer before I can fully like comprehend what the hell I read. Very similarly, we also have My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Outtro Moshfegh. Now, okay, on premise it's not similar, but I felt very similarly about this. This is a literary fiction novel about our nameless protagonist who is going through a lot of changes in her life. She's a recent graduate. She's got this, artsy job. She is tall, blonde, thin, and pretty. So she seems to have everything she wants, but at the same time, she's dealing with the loss of both of her parents in very quick succession. She has this on-again, off-again boyfriend who's quite frankly a dick. She has this best friend that's just kind of a very shallow and pleasant person, and she's dealing with all sorts of like general anxieties and depressions. So she decides to take a year of rest. She is going to just spend the year sleeping with the help of a dozen or so prescriptions provided to her by her crazy therapist. And she hopes when this year is over, she's going to emerge brand new. What I liked about My Year of Rest and Relaxation, I loved how darkly funny this was. I loved how relatable it was at times, and I loved how this was just something that I think everyone can find something in, depending on what kind of stage you are in your life and what kind of things you're dealing with. What I didn't like about this was kind of the themes and the direction they were taken in. I felt either they weren't pushed far enough or there was some ideas there, but they just weren't developed fully. This came highly recommended from my friend Gabe. I will link his channel down below, as well as his video where he talks about Outtro Moshfegh's whole collection of books. He read every single one of her books in like quick succession, did a whole video talking about them. The video is fantastic. I really loved it, and he inspired me to pick up this book. I think Moshfegh did a great job at talking about these themes of loneliness, depression, millennial angst, existential dread, you know, self-care and relaxation and escapism. I think the issue for me is that it kind of felt like there were all these ideas and themes just circulating, and I felt like they weren't properly developed. I felt like this book was almost too quirky, but not in a good way. Like, it was just trying to go for like shocking, when I think there was some really interesting ideas that were there at the core. Our protagonist is beautiful and rich and thin and intelligent. She graduated from Columbia, I think, and she has all these things that everyone should want, but she's feeling this kind of dread. She's feeling this angst about just being alive and dealing with life going forward. And I feel like that is a pretty relatable thing, because it doesn't matter what kind of situation you come from, you can still feel depressed and anxious and just mentally ill. So I feel like from that perspective, there could have been just something taken a little bit further, perhaps from that angle, but it also fell into this really weird pacing issue where the whole middle just dragged, and we lost some of those interesting themes that were happening at the beginning, because from the beginning I quite liked it, and then towards the middle it started dragging. And then the ending came, and the ending was just a bit too convenient and rushed for me. And obviously this book is not a book that is plot heavy. The whole point is that she's taking a year to sleep. Obviously it's not going to be exciting, but I felt like Ottessa Moshfegh had started this book with this really interesting idea, and then towards the end she struggled on finishing it after she had slogged through writing part of that year. So she came up with this really convenient ending to our narrator's story, and it just felt too neat for me. Overall, I didn't rate either this or Tender as the Flesh. I don't really know where I stand on them, because it's hard to judge and balance like my enjoyment versus their actual merit, and I don't really think I could accurately give them a rating. I would recommend this one. I think everyone could get something out of this, and I think everyone would get something different out of it, so I don't think you should avoid picking this up. Just be warned, it is a very unique book. The next book I'm going to talk about is Gyo by Junji Ito. This is a horror manga about a town that has a very strange smell, and once the citizens start noticing the smell, the fish start behaving very oddly, and I think I'll just leave it at that. What I liked about this book was the artwork. Obviously Junji Ito is insane when it comes to his horror, and I liked how shocking it was. I also really liked the short story included at the end of this. Unfortunately, I didn't really like the story that much, and I didn't find there was that much intrigue. So I read Uzumaki last year by the same author and absolutely loved it. Uzumaki was the story of a town infected with spirals, and it was such a weird concept, but he took it all the way there with his incredible artwork. The problem with Gyo was that it did not have the same high concept, but I was still excited because I feel like he creates these really interesting settings and crazy creations. The problem is it just did not hit that same mark for me. Maybe because this was a linear story following the same characters throughout a kind of very clear timeline, versus Uzumaki, which was a series of vignettes set in the same town with a few recurring characters, but it was a bit more individual because the spirals manifested themselves in different ways, which made it a bit more interesting. And it was a lot longer because it was in vignettes, and granted this was shorter, but it was linear, same characters, same main manifestation of the smell and the fish, but I just didn't quite enjoy it as much. Maybe the linear focus is not working for me and I should go read his short stories instead. It just didn't evoke the same level of terror in me as Uzumaki did. It just felt a bit more mundane, maybe because it was explained a bit earlier on, or maybe because it was this kind of linear story, so you got to watch it progress, rather than the kind of very detached, crazy individual stories of Uzumaki. But for some reason, this just truly did not work for me as well as Uzumaki did. I was really, really disappointed by this. I am still going to read everything he's ever published because his artwork is just absolutely incredible. I'm just let down. I ended up giving this a 3 out of 5 stars. By no means do I think it was bad, it was just disappointing. His artwork though is just absolutely insane. So the next book I want to talk about is A Torch Against the Night by Sabaa Tahir. This is a young adult fantasy. This is the sequel to An Ember in the Ashes, which follows Laia and Elias, two citizens on opposing sides of a kind of class conflict in this ancient Roman-inspired empire. Laia poses as a slave to help infiltrate the military academy for the resistance in order to try to get her brother back, and Elias is a student at this military academy trying to train to become an elite warrior, but his heart is not in it, and their paths cross and all sorts of political and crazy magical things ensue. I buddy read this also with Nat from Nerdy Nat Reads. I will link her channel down below. We are reading the entire Ember Quartet, and I will say I like this one a lot better than An Ember in the Ashes. What I liked about this book was 100% the plot and the pacing. It was a lot more interesting. This even had one of those kind of adventure, like road trip, borderline road trip scenes, and I normally hate those, but I really enjoyed it here. I also thought we got a lot more interesting character dynamics. I also really liked the setting and the atmosphere, and I also liked that we got to see more of the magic of this world and the politics. Unfortunately, one of the things I did not like about it was some of the other character dynamics. Some of the characters just made the worst decisions ever, and I didn't really like it as much. I didn't like how convenient some things were, and I didn't like how it wrapped up, but it didn't. But I mean, there's 4 books in the series, so of course it's not going to fully wrap up. Honestly, like the last 150 pages or so, I just had to speed through it all in one day because I was hooked. I found that it was starting to really pick up in a way that An Ember in the Ashes didn't. There was just a lot more action. Oh god, my hands are sweaty. There was just a lot more action going on. There was just a lot more interesting things happening with the world and the magic and the politics and things that we kind of got glimpses of before, but we didn't fully explore. But like I mentioned, some of the character decisions really hindered some of the interesting political things that were going on, and it just felt like it was put there to serve the plot rather than to serve the character. And I personally get really frustrated when that kind of thing happens, because I think if you're going to build up a character, then their decisions should make sense and move the plot forward rather than the plot should decide how the characters act. That's just my opinion. So Helene in this one, for example, was just really driving me up the wall because she made some very glaring mistakes that could have easily been avoided, but they were just very obviously meant to shock the reader and serve the plot, so I didn't like that. But then again, the romance in this book greatly improved. It got a lot less annoying and angsty, and while the romances were still driving some of the characters' decisions, it seemed to make a little bit more sense this time. I don't know how I feel about the ending in terms of, like, if I wasn't doing this read along, I don't know if I'd even want to continue this series. I obviously will, just to get it done, but like I said, it wrapped up, but it didn't. So I'm not really sure like why it ended the way it did, but I will be finishing it. And listen, these are super quick, easy reads when I'm in between a bunch of other stuff that's just a lot heavier, like fantasy and nonfiction. These are so fun to just blast through and get out of the way, so I don't mind it for that. And once again, the magic and the atmosphere are pretty cool, and I love the political stuff. So yeah, I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. I thought it was better than An Ember in the Ashes, and I definitely think it was a strong entry into the series. The next book I want to talk about is Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. This is an adult thriller, mystery, kind of almost a character study about Camille, who returns to her tiny southern hometown to report on the death and disappearance of 2 very young girls. She has not been back home in like 8 years, and she has a lot of complicated relationships with her family and people from the town and the town itself, so you kind of explore that throughout her reporting process. What I liked about this book was simply how dark it was and how uncomfortable it made me, but like in a way that I enjoyed. I really loved that small town feeling. I loved the kind of creeping dread that you feel in not a horror way, but in a very realistic way. What I didn't like about this was the pacing and some of the characters, and I didn't always love the writing, but I felt like it wasn't that much of a hindrance. So when I say this book made me uncomfortable, it was more in the way that like the way that the relationship dynamics that the main character had with people around her were just very uncomfortable to sit and like read about. Also, the way that the main character talked about girls was kind of odd. So she would often make comments about the appearance of other women and young girls in the town, and the girls in the town would sexualize themselves, but the main character would kind of just go along with it because she did the same thing growing up in the same town. And it's supposed to be uncomfortable. So like obviously the book did what it was supposed to, and from that angle, like I can't hate it. And like everyone was super unlikable, but again, I think that was the point and it worked. It's not a fun book by any means, but it is a pretty quick read. I liked the audiobook, and I thought that overall it was just a very interesting take on the kind of mystery thriller you know, reporter with inner demons returning to her hometown kind of plotline that we've seen before. The end made the whole thing worth it for me though. I found that even though it was kind of not the most exciting book, the end was pretty good. It wasn't this neat, happy ending that everyone deserves. It wasn't wrapped up with a neat bow, but it still made you kind of reflect on what you had read and gone through and your own reactions to the issues in the book and how the character progressed through the book. So I thought it was really good from that end. And like, it made you feel some really weird things that you shouldn't want to feel towards such like terrible people, but like you did. If you go into this, just know that it is like super dark. You should absolutely look up the trigger warnings because it is a lot. This is not like a regular thriller where you can just expect like death and stuff. There's a lot of other things going on, so definitely just like be careful, search it. But yeah, this ended up being a 3.5 star read for me. I liked it a lot better than I liked Gone Girl, like just ridiculous. I don't understand how Gone Girl got so popular when this book exists. The next book I want to talk about is Battle Royale by Koshun Takami. This is an adult sci-fi horror dystopian. This is set in an alternate Japan that is ruled by this authoritarian government, and every single year several 9th grade classes are chosen to be dropped off in a remote arena, given a bunch of weapons, and fight till there's only one man standing. And so you are following one of these classes, specifically one of these characters. Like, you get a lot inside his head, but you do get an overview of every single classmate and their moment of death, more or less, and a little bit of their backstory. What I loved about this was how fast-paced it was. I could not put this down. I could blow through 200 pages in one sitting, no problem, because of just how gripping it was. I loved that you got the backstory of everyone, and I loved the kind of grittiness of it. What I didn't like as much was some of the issues with writing, and I also am not sure how I feel about the ending, but that's kind of not the whole point. I think it's not one of those books where the ending makes it. You really want the process. I also didn't quite get what the author was going for in terms of themes. This is the only book this author has ever written, and I'm not sure I fully understood what he was trying to achieve with it, but I love the ride. This is often cited as like the source material for the Hunger Games because of this idea of kids fighting to the death and this authoritarian government being in charge of it. But truly, these are really, really different. The tension and the pacing were just built so well. Every time something interesting would be close to happening, you would kind of switch to a different character's point of view. You'd get a lot of their backstory, and you could see how that influenced the decisions they were going to take and how they viewed their peers around them that are now their enemies. The different perspectives also really help because in this game specifically, there is the inclusion of these forbidden zones. So you see that the map has a grid, and at certain times throughout the day, certain zones become forbidden. And if you wander into that zone or you are in that zone when the timer goes off, you will explode because every student has a collar around their neck that basically tracks them, lets the game makers know when they're dead, all that kind of stuff. And the collar can also make them blow up. So I like that you were able to see these kind of different POVs when they were escaping from the forbidden zones or just around these different zones, because this was an island that they're on that was inhabited before. They just kicked all the residents off and made the kids play the game there. So there was a school, there was a clinic, there was just like a farm, a couple farms, there was like a little town, there's all these different areas to play in. I will say I found a lot of the characters a little bit one-dimensional. I don't know if I can chalk that up to cultural differences because this is a translated work of fiction, or maybe it's because the whole point was not to, I don't know, introduce these very complex characters, because you do have like 42 students in this class and you're trying to, you know, get through all of their deaths. So there is a possibility that it was an intentional choice, but I just didn't like that because our main characters even did not get that much personality. We got a lot of like history and we saw their decisions and it made sense. But at the end of the day, I found some of them a little bit flat. Also, as I mentioned, I'm not sure about the author's intentions with this, so I sat on this for a little while thinking about it, and I'm gonna compare it to the Hunger Games just in the sense that with the Hunger Games, there is the very clear goal of making the reader understand that the point of the games is not just killing, it is to reinforce the authoritarian government's control, it is to punish the citizens, it is to keep them docile because they clearly have no power compared to the government that can you know, control these children. And it also has the message of like how we make spectator sports out of everything, and how Hunger Games have become the spectator sport in the capital, whereas in the districts where the children are coming from, it's this horrific event. And I understand that the Hunger Games is a young adult book, so maybe the point is to spoon feed the readers a little bit, but I seem to have missed what the point of the game was, other than the very obvious to inspire fear in citizens, but I couldn't see the end goal as much. And maybe that's the point, maybe it was just like senseless killing. I just didn't quite get it. And again, this seems to be like a running theme. Maybe I'm too stupid for some of the books I read and I don't get the themes. I never know if it's me or the books, but also in this case, like I didn't quite get what the point was. But honestly, it was just so much fun. It was fast-paced and thrilling, and it didn't really matter. It was just such a good time. If you're looking for something with a ton of gore and intensity and just a great time, this is really fast. A lot faster than it would seem, because this book is massive and absolutely worth your time. This was a 4-star read for me. The next book I want to talk about is The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey. This is an adult horror novel, although in my mind, I know it's classified as horror like on bookshelves and stuff, but in my mind it is a bit more sci-fi because it's a bit post-apocalyptic. You are following this young girl who gets up every morning to go to school, but she doesn't just go, she has to be strapped down to a chair. There are guns trained on her, and she's in a classroom with all these other kids that are like strapped down, and she's always wondering like why. She always jokes that she won't bite, but like no one laughs. And I think the more I give away about this, the less fun it'll be. So I'll leave that there. You really see the world through her eyes, and you're kind of following her mostly at the beginning, and I think that made it quite special. What I really liked about this was how it twisted this post-apocalyptic setting that we know quite well on its head, and it followed a few different characters and you got to see a few different perspectives. It was really engaging and it was a lot of fun to read about. It wasn't necessarily the most like high octane, super fast paced, but it was just really interesting. I'm not sure there were a lot of things I didn't like about it. I can't pinpoint anything specifically. It just like, it didn't give me that 5-star feeling. This was a 4-star read, but it was good. I enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I would, honestly. I was not expecting to like this. I found the characters quite compelling. I thought that everyone had their own unique point of view. There was a really good mix of like humor, but also a little bit of sadness and some good ethical considerations and discussions, and also some very like emotional considerations. And there was also a lot of scientific discussions that kind of created a little bit of a balance between everything. It wasn't just one note. I also love how the title tied in with the plot and the whole book ending. I know I can't like explain it, but like if you read this or if you have read this and you know, I just thought it was like such a nice touch. I love when everything is so thought out like that, and that's what I really liked about this. I like that everything was thought out, everything was well plotted, it wasn't just happening for the sake of it. And even though you could sometimes guess where the story might go, it still kept you really interesting. Again, the settings and the character made it great. The tone and the different shifts in tone depending on the situation were great. There was truly some like really funny moments where I laughed, and there were some emotional ones, and just overall it was a really fun ride. Pretty quick read. I would definitely recommend it if you like any kind of like sci-fi horror. Horror elements were not quite there. Like there was a little bit of gore, but like I think it is horror because of the subject matter specifically, which I'm not going to spoil again, because of this like specific post-apocalyptic scenario, but I don't consider that horror. To be honest, I consider that more sci-fi. But regardless, if you're not into horror, I would still recommend this for you. I guess that's where I was trying to go. I think that like the post-apocalyptic kind of scientific aspect of it made it really interesting, and I really quite enjoyed this. Like if you like any kind of post-apocalyptic and science-focused books, if you're a very like logical, rational person when it comes to your post-apocalyptic books, this would be for you. So the next books I want to talk about were all 5-star reads, so I can't really rate them in terms of like which one I liked better. So we're just gonna get right into it. First one I want to talk about is The Lies of Locke, Lamora by Scott Lynch. This is one of my favorite fantasy series. It follows the Gentlemen Bastards, which are a group of thieves. They live in this Renaissance era Venetian-inspired city with all the glitz and the glamour, but also filthy canals and dirt everywhere. And you are following them as they're trying to pull off the biggest heist that they have ever done. But there's also all sorts of political things happening. The Grey King is threatening everything they know. There's all sorts of really cool stuff going on. This was a reread, of course. If you didn't know, I've read this book before back in November of last year, and I loved it. I fell completely in love. In terms of things I love about this book, I would literally say everything. The characters, the banter, the humor, the emotions, the atmosphere in this book is insane. The plot is just so high stakes, so much fun. I can't say a single bad thing about this book. Truly, I can see how some people might dislike it in terms of maybe the amount of backstory you get. I've seen that complaint a lot, but frankly, I loved it. This book is just so funny and dark and atmospheric and twisty-turny and cruel, but just there's just so many good things in it. The atmosphere specifically is just so incredibly crafted. I remember after I finished reading this for the first time, I could still recall months down the road these specific backdrops for certain scenes. Like, it's so clear in my mind. The way that Lynch has created these areas for his scenes is just spectacular. You're there, you can smell it and see it and feel it. Locke is just one of my favorite archetypes in literature, I think. He reminds me a lot of Kaz and Nikolai from the Grishaverse, and also Kelsier from the Mistborn series. This is a character who is about to pull off the impossible, and everyone tells them that they're crazy and that it can never be done, but everyone still follows them because they're always organized, they're up for the task, and they will get it done. Even when all the odds are against them, they are beloved and they are followed and they achieve their tasks, and they're just crazy lunatics, but they have all their shit figured out. And that is my favorite type of character. Like, the plan has all these holes, everything seems to be going wrong, and at the last second, this character pulls everyone out of the friggin' rubble that they've created and says, yeah, I planned for this all along. Here you go. Here's how I got around it. You guys are suckers that you didn't see it coming. Like, I love those characters, and that's what Locke is to a T. But beyond Locke, the characters that are in here with him, the other gentleman bastards, there's just such a good relationship between all of them, and the banter is so good. This book is fucking hilarious. I think what I really liked too upon reread was the fact that since I knew the plot, I was able to focus on these friendships and relationships and the kind of more character side of everything, because I already knew what was going to happen. I knew the twists, I knew what scenes were coming up, so I was able to really enjoy the characters and the setting a lot more on the second read. I can't wait to continue this series. I'm going to be reading the second book in August if you saw my Game of Tomes. If not, I will link it up here, but spoiler alert, I'm reading the second book for the series because I just can't wait to continue. I love it so much. 5 stars. Absolutely. The next 5-star read I want to talk about is Smoke Gets in Your Eyes by Caitlin Doty. This is a memoir of Caitlin's time working in a crematorium and the lessons that she learned along the way. What I loved about this book was pretty much everything. I don't read memoirs very often, but I thought that Caitlin's voice in this was just very authentic. She wasn't afraid to admit when she was wrong. She was very open about the lessons she learned and the trauma that she experienced, and I really quite enjoyed that, and I just really liked her voice in this. There's nothing I didn't like about it, honestly. It was short, sweet, to the point. It was enjoyable. There was no stories in here that didn't have any kind of impact on me, and everything was just really well done. This was just really beautiful in terms of the discussion it had about society's attitudes towards death and how the author viewed death and how she thinks everyone should approach death. It was just beautiful and moving, but it was also like darkly funny at times. She managed to just distill these fears and issues that we have surrounding death in such a palatable way that left you thinking about it without exhausting you with it, because death is such a heavy topic, but she doesn't make it feel heavy at all. She really just presents it in such a way that makes you want to think about it and challenge your own perceptions about it, and just challenge why things are the way they are. I came out of this book feeling cleansed in a way. Like, I came out of this book feeling brand new and seeing the world differently, and I think that is the mark of a great book, honestly. It is so touching, and I think that everybody should give this a read, honestly. It was just fantastic. The final book I want to talk about, we have reached the end, friends. The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. If you watched my wrap up for June, you'll know that I actually started this book in June, but I completed it this month, and so I have thoughts. This is an adult fantasy first book in a series, and it is set in this world that's been completely devastated. It sits in ruin, and it is ruled by the Lord Ruler, who is a bit of a tyrant. In this world, people can ingest different metals to perform different tasks. People who can just ingest one metal are called mistings, but there are some very rare people who can ingest all the metals and use them, and they are called mistborn. You mainly follow Vin, who is a street urchin from the kind of oppressed class in this world, the Ska, and she gets an offer that she absolutely cannot refuse from Kelsier, who is the leader of this kind of rebel thieving group, and together they discover her powers, they discover more secrets about the world, and they just kind of learn a lot more about themselves, I guess. There's just a lot going on. It is a pretty big book, and it's just absolutely beautiful. I loved the characters, I loved the magic system, I loved the relationships that the characters built between themselves. That was one of the best things about this. You really got to see Vin shine and transform. I also just really loved Brandon Sanderson's mind for the magic system and the political stuff going on. There's just a lot of very interesting things, little moving parts all the time that were just fantastic. I will say the only thing I didn't love about this book was like how slow it was to get into at first. You're really just thrown into it, but then once Vin meets Kelsier, he starts becoming her mentor a little bit, and he really shows her the ropes of the world and the magic, and so you're really able to kind of grasp it a little bit better. But the beginning is definitely a little bit hard to get into. Like everyone always says, Brandon Sanderson's magic systems are A+, and I completely agree. I thought that everything was just so well thought out and very unique, but it felt real despite it being like crazy magic. I loved how intricate the plot was, but I loved how you could still follow along. You saw how action A affected B, and you saw how those threads all came together. Again, Kelsier is like Locke Lamora. He's one of those characters that is the man with a plan, and everyone thinks that he's batshit, but they still follow him to the ends of the earth because he's charismatic and he cares for everyone, and it was no surprise that I was going to love him. I love these kind of dramatic standoffs that happen. Like, I love that there is action sprinkled throughout. It's not just this one big showdown. There's just these really good scenes that you're sitting there at the edge of your seat wondering what's gonna happen, and these like little cliffhangers, and it's just so much fun to read. But even in the downtimes between these action scenes, you get these scenes of the rebel group of Kelsier and Vin interacting with their crew, and you get to know everybody better, and you get to know our main characters, Vin and Kelsier, better, and it's just really beautiful to watch everyone form this friendship, this little family. I also didn't hate how this one wrapped up. Like, I'm not in a huge rush to continue the series, which is good because I'm in the middle of a lot of other series. So I think that everything just kind of wrapped up really nicely. I don't have any complaints about this. It's fantastic, and I'm really glad I finally read some Brandon Sanderson because I know he's like the current king of epic fantasy, and I can absolutely see why. There is a lot of really, really good stuff in here. I can't wait to keep reading more of his stuff because his writing style is just incredibly engaging. That is it. We have made it to the end. Let me know if you guys have read any of these. I'd love to talk to you about them. I know there was a lot to get through, but it was one of those reading months where I just picked up everything and swallowed it seems. My social media is linked down below. You guys can always come talk to me there. Thank you guys so much for sitting through this and for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!